The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the other gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Russell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, Admiral, General. Part of the concerns that I hear, Madam Secretary, about a policy push on the Trade-Pacific Authority, the Trade Partnership Authority, and the move to the Pacific is that if you look at history, when Commodore Perry went in and said we're going to open up Tokyo and did, they immediately adopted our ways. We saw within 2 generations incredible industrial capability, military doctrine, to the point where they even defeated a world power. John Hay, at the turn of the century, then developed an open door policy with China as a hedge on Japan, almost using the same terms, hegemony. And now we see this push into the Pacific, and while we've had briefings here in the last couple of years with the same talks of how we're going to expand or change our posture or do different things, now it does not seem that the diplomatic or military advances are keeping pace with the trade advances. Unfortunately, in 15 years, we went from ally, making ships, signing naval treaties, to having to melt Japanese out of pillboxes and drop atomic bombs on their cities. I would hope that as we make an advance and a pivot into the Pacific, that we would not make those same policy errors. My question would really be to the Admiral or to the General. Missile defense seems to be the greatest short-term threat that we could possibly face. You have limited ANTPY-2 radars. The funding for those and the building of those does not seem to be a priority, and yet they may be the very things that stand between us and this incredible threat. How is that being addressed?
Well, Congressman, I would refer the specific timelines to the Missile Defense Agency and the services who buy them. But let me just talk about missile defense in general. I'm faced with two problems, and General Scaparrotti is part of the second one. One is I have a Homeland Defense support requirement where not only do I have to defend Guam and Hawaii from potential missile attacks, but also have to support NORTHCOM as NORTHCOM were to transition to where we'd have to defend the homeland from maybe a rogue attack from North Korea. And so we moved rapidly to put things in position in the last decade that I think give us a relative assurance on our homeland defense. We have misguided missile destroyers that operate in the north. We put the THAAD radar, we put that in there in about less than a month into Guam when we knew that there was a potential for a launch from North Korea, which was really it's fabulous that the Army could move that fast and make it happen. We fast-tracked the TPY-2 radar that was put in Shiriki in Japan, so now we have two of those going, and we're having dialogues about where a third THAAD may go. The second part of our problem is defending forces in the theater and defending forces in a ever-increasing environment of ballistic missiles. And these can be short range, they can be directed at aircraft carriers, directed at ships, they can be directed at land bases, and you can't defend against all of them. There's just too many of them. You can't buy enough interceptors. So what you do is you buy enough to give you confidence that you can deter, and that when conflict were to start, that you give you enough time to be able to get the rest of your war plan.
I appreciate that, Admiral, and thank you. In fact, it brings up the larger concerns of power projection and even long logistical lines for reinforcement, even if we can project power. This month in history, over 100,000 Americans had to surrender at Bataan, not for lack of fight, not for lack of leadership, but for lack of capacity to get to them. And with a lot of these things, I realize the constraints that each of you live under, and the policy has shifted, but we don't necessarily see the resources coming your way. How would you, what counsel or what advice would you give to members of Congress of how we correct that as we look at a complete pivot in changing the economies globally, in the friction points that will create, and yet not have a baton-like future or an inability to project power and to also sustain it, either one?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I think in terms of the projection of power, I'm probably the best example of that requirement. I have 28,500 service members on the peninsula, sufficient for today, but certainly if we begin to escalate, specifically to BMD, I'll ask for additional ballistic missile defense assets very quickly in order to safeguard not only our military installations, but the American civilians we have there, and along with our Iraq allies. So when we look at resourcing, the impact of sequestration in 13, et cetera, it reduces the readiness of the force. And what I'll need on the peninsula is forces that arrive ready to fight in a high-intensity conflict. And then also the impact of sequestration or reduction of resources is, as you mentioned, I'll need them on a pretty specific timeline because I have a large adversary in close proximity to the capital of South Korea.
Gentleman's time has expired. Ms. McSally is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your time and your testimony. General Scaparrotti, I want to talk about the potential impact of divesting in the A-10 and the impact that that's going to have on our capabilities with your mission, and then also Admiral Locklear in general in the theater. The depleted uranium on the 30 millimeter, specifically the anti-tank capabilities. I know you've shared in your testimony about how North Korea is going more towards asymmetric capabilities, but there's still a very real conventional threat, as you know. And should we have to deal with that, having been a part of units that were supposed to be heading your way to be reinforcements to those that are stationed right there, it's a pretty tight timeline to be able to react in a very short geographic area, as you know. So gaining and maintaining air superiority, and then making sure that we have the anti-armor capability against North Korean capabilities is really important. So if the President's budget were to be fulfilled and the A-10 would be divested in, you would lose the capability of the depleted uranium and the A-10 squadrons right there at Osan. What capability gap does that provide for you, and what are the plans to fill that gap in order to address this particular threat?
Thank you. As you said, the A-10 was designed for a specific capability, and it's very good at that. Being an infantryman, I have high regard for its ability to support ground troops. And in the region that I'm in, particularly a mountainous region, it also can get low and it can turn in tight spots. Having said that, I recognize, too, the Air Force's difficulty in terms of the funding and the need with an aging aircraft with reduced funds to perhaps move away from that and go to a multi-role ship. And I've been assured that if the A-10 were to come out, there would be a multi-role aircraft that would replace that squadron on the peninsula, and I would need that. I would need additional air force.
But the F-16 doesn't have the depleted uranium or the anti-tank. I want to focus specifically on anti-tank. We're often talking about close air support in Iraq and Afghanistan and other areas where the A-10 brings unique capabilities. But if we're talking about piercing armor, an anti-tank capability that the 30 millimeter with depleted uranium brings, and the F-16s, F-15Es, they don't have that capability. So what gap does that create for you, and what do you think is going to be replacing that?
Well, I don't know from the Air Force. I mean, frankly, I would use air in different ways, the multi-role aircraft, and then use the systems that I have on the ground primarily against their armor threat. And so it would open a gap in terms of having that aircraft for that specific capability.
Right, and I think the last thing that we want to be doing is be relying on having to have a tank battle, right, in the day and age where we have the capabilities to, and we have the plans to be able to take out those capabilities from the air. We certainly wouldn't want to roll back that capability and have our guys on the ground having to be fight that when we do actually possess the capability in the air to be doing that with the A-10. So you agree that it would create a gap?
It would, yes.
Okay, and Admiral Locklear, do you agree just in the larger plans, we've been very much focusing on near-peer, conventional potential scenarios in the future. So the close air support and the anti-tank capabilities that you would be lacking without the A-10, is that something that you think is also a gap for the greater mission that you have?
Well, it's certainly nice to have everything you could have when you need it. I would say that in general in the Asia Pacific, other than the Korea Peninsula, that the close air support mission is of a lesser concern to me in general. But as the Air Force moves forward with the systems that they have to move forward in the future, I think you're going to go towards a close air support model with airplanes that have improved precision-guided missile weapons that can go against tanks and can deal with a broad array of them.
Okay, thank you. Again, we talked about the F-35 yesterday in a separate hearing, but the munitions capabilities on the F-35 actually are not a armor penetrating capability, and survivability is in question, especially when you do get into that close fight. I mean, I agree, you've got a high-end challenge that you have to deal with for sure, and we've got to be able to meet that both with air and naval forces. But if we do have men and women on the ground in harm's way in any potential scenario, we do want to make sure that obviously we can protect them with the best capability that we have. So I appreciate your responses. Thanks for your service as always, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back, and Mr. Courtney is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Forbes, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Yesterday morning, Undersecretary Kendall was the sort of featured speaker at the Sierra and Space gathering over in Virginia, packed room, talked about a lot of the same issues that are being discussed here, that narrowing gap that Admiral Locklear, you referred to earlier this morning. But what was interesting is at the end of his remarks, he actually pretty passionately used a pretty good chunk of his time talking about STEM education in this country as really a critical component of our national security long term, and particularly with the narrowing gap that Admiral Locklear mentioned. The STEM Education Council, which is a pretty extraordinary coalition of Microsoft, National Association of Manufacturers, all the hard science professional educators, American Farm Bureau, released a report recently where they talked about 23% of the graduate degrees in STEM in the world today are China, and 10% are the U.S. And that kind of, I think, particularly when we talk about Asia Pacific and the challenges and again, looking beyond just today's budget year, that point that I think Undersecretary Kendall was making is pretty powerful. And when we talk about sequestration and trying to balance defense and non-defense, I mean, the fact is that education is one of those that could pay the price, quote unquote, if we just had a sort of lopsided approach to dealing with sequestration. But long term, in terms of our defense, that is just adding to the to that disparity that's pretty disturbing right now. So Ms. Wormuth, just wondering if you maybe wanted to comment on that. Anyone else about what you see out there in terms of where China's investment in education and the increasing capabilities that we're seeing emerging domestically from their country.
Thank you, Congressman. I think that's Undersecretary Kendall, as he often does, was making a very good point. And we are very much looking at the strides that countries in the Asia-Pacific region are making in terms of science and technology and mathematics. And it is clear that in our country, we don't, we have a harder time for any number of reasons convincing our young people to go into those areas. But it's critical. And making sure that we have the educational policy and funding for those types of skills is what we're going to need very much to be able to remain competitive in those fields in the future. And I think Secretary Carter has talked about this issue as well. And not only do we need to find ways to get more folks into those areas as they pursue their higher education, but also we're looking at how in the Department of Defense do we find ways to bring more people with those types of skills into our system, because part of what we need to do to be able to remain competitive and to be innovative and to get after some of these technology challenges is to be able to bring in those sort of fresh people with new, fresh ideas, and that's something that our department probably needs to be a little more agile about.
I would agree. I mean, how we recruit the force of the future has to be part of a national dialogue. I mean, 1% of the American people day to day defend it. Some of them are the most highly technical people that this country can produce. And if we don't have a system underpinning it that produces enough for us to lead the world, we will not be successful. And I know the service chiefs are all engaged on this thought process of where does that future force come from?
Thank you. I mean, this is the 60th anniversary of the launching of the Nautilus, and you know, Admiral Rickover in his final days actually almost stopped talking about the nuclear navy and was really focused on U.S. education policy for precisely those reasons. And again, the threat in Asia is where I think this imbalance is really the most acute. And again, I think as this committee, you know, I should look at the big picture here in terms of just, you know, what is national defense really? What are the building blocks of it? And having an educational system that, you know, is prepared to provide the workforce for both the military and obviously the people who develop our weapons systems and weapons platforms is really got to be part of that discussion. So thank you for your testimony today. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've talked a lot about the region today, and I want to focus a little bit on our allies in the region, and maybe touch on a little bit, if you would, about their efforts of increasing their capabilities, not only in traditional warfare aspects, but say cyber and space and how we're coordinating with them, if you would.
Sir, if you would, I'll go first with Republic of Korea. They have, first, overall, within their defense budget, over the past 4 years or so, they've been averaging about 4 to 5% increase in their defense budget. This past year, it was 2.5% of their GDP, which is very good compared to, say, our NATO allies, et cetera. And so they've been focused on meeting the capabilities that they need, given the evolving threat in North Korea, but also in order to meet the commitments that we've made together as an alliance. An example being the funding of the PAC-3 upgrade and the missiles for those this year, Global Hawk last year to assist in ISR, an improvement in their C4 systems, command control communications and computers, to enable them as we go to OPCON transition to ensure that they can lead a combined force in a high intensity conflict. So overall, I think they're focused on that. Within their budget, they have the same challenges that we do in terms of the social demand and the competition with defense and the expense of the systems that they have to put in place in order to increase their military's capability and to deal with the threat that's evolving in the north.
And what about Japan?
Yeah. I'm happy to speak a little bit to Japan. Again, you know, I think we have an incredibly strong relationship and alliance with Japan, and that will be renewed and I think brought to the next level with the completion of the defense guidelines that are going to be completed by the end of this month. They, as you know, are buying a large number of F-35s. They've expressed an intent to buy the V-22. They also are working on upgrading their Aegis platforms. They are working with us on Global Hawk, so they are also, I think, doing a tremendous amount to upgrade their capabilities. And then we also have a very significant cooperative production project with them for the SM-32 missile. That's a $3.2 billion cooperative program with Japan.
Yeah. Admiral?
Well, in addition, I would say that the Philippines, who's another key ally of theirs, we have in negotiation for an enhanced cooperative defense agreement. That's currently being debated inside the Philippines on the political side. But that has an opportunity to help them improve, to get them to a better minimum credible defense. It also has the opportunity for us to strengthen that alliance and strengthen our position in Southeast Asia. Our other ally, Australia, making good strides. I mean, it's a great alliance. And they're, as far as I can tell, they're increasing defense spending. They're having a good dialogue about how they will partner with us. They're thinking about extending their capabilities in submarine warfare and some other areas, amphibious warfare. So in general, I'd say the trend of our allies across the board is that they're investing more in their defense and in their security rather than less. And they're investing more in directions that are complementary to our capabilities, so that we all enjoy the same mutual benefits of that security architecture.
Thank you all very much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and with that, Madam Secretary, General, Admiral, thank you so much for being with us today. We're getting you out right on time, and we appreciate, as you heard all of our members express their appreciation to you for your service to our country, but thank you for being willing today to educate, advise, and consult with us as we try to be a component part of the national defense of this country. And with that, we're adjourned.